Hello, this is CJ Radune of RotoWire.com here for your Formula One update on the Prime Sports Network. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our motorsports videos all season long, including NASCAR, IndyCar, and of course Formula One. And you can access my columns by clicking the link in the description of the video below. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know what is on your mind. So coming up this weekend, we've got the Formula One Singapore Airlines Singapore Grand Prix. But as always, we got to look at what happened last time out. Last time out, it was the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. And while it was predicted to be a straightforward fight for Max Verstappen going for his record win streak, it wasn't exactly the most straightforward for him. So Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc, both of Ferrari, they qualified really well. In fact, Sainz ended up taking the pole and beating Verstappen to that top starting spot. And that left Max having to find a way past on track. It was clear from the start, like every other race so far this season, though, that the Red Bull was faster, and that race pace is just too tough for anybody to overcome. And you knew that he would have to get by, and eventually he did make that pass on Sainz. After that, for Verstappen, there was absolutely no looking back. The race was basically over by that time. And then after those pit stops cycled through, Verstappen actually led all the way to the finish to claim his record 10th straight victory, the longest win streak in Formula One history. So for second place at Monza, it was actually a similar story. We've been talking about Sergio Perez and whether or not he was actually going to be able to be that second best driver, given that he's behind the wheel of the Red Bull. He was actually beaten in qualifying again by the Ferraris, but that race pace of that Red Bull, that enabled him to stalk those cars that were ahead, make the passes, and climb up to that runner-up spot. So Monza ended up being another good result from Perez, and it looks like he seems to have put his slump firmly behind him. And now it's just a matter of him consolidating that second spot in the championship behind teammate Max Verstappen. So Ferrari, they were one of our questions last week. We were wondering how well they were going to do, or I was wondering how well they were going to do, and whether or not they were actually going to give up on their 2023 development and focus entirely on 2024. Basically, I think we've got a couple more weeks before that goes or that happens by the looks of things in Monza. They did get one of their drivers on the podium for that home race. Sainz was the one who got that honor. And while they undoubtedly got better at Monza, finishing third and fourth, it was a track that quite honestly would have suited them, to be honest with you. So I look forward to them to devote their resources more toward 2024 relatively soon here. We're going to see how they do in Singapore. The track is significantly different than Monza for them, so it's going to be an interesting one. We'll see. I think qualifying pace for Ferrari is still going to be pretty strong, but race pace is all season where really they've had those questions swirling around them. So how about that biggest surprise from Monza? Well, we talked a lot about Alex Albon last time. He did impress. It was a seventh place finish, and he probably could have gotten more, except for the fact that Monza is actually pretty easy to pass on once you get that DRS going and you got the hard braking into turn one. So I predicted that would be a good weekend, so I'm not going to count that as a surprise. I'm actually going to say that the bigger surprise at Monza was arguably McLaren and Aston Martin. Neither of those teams fared very well, and they lost ground in the standings as a result. However, Liam Lawson, who is substituting for the injured Daniel Ricciardo, wow, was he good. Monza was his second race, filling in for Ricciardo, and he drove a veteran-like race. He finished 11th, almost made it into the points in that AlphaTauri. And his teammate Yuki Tsunoda, consideringly, didn't even make the first lap. In fact, he stopped on the formation lap, didn't even make it around to the grid. So let's look for Lawson as a future full-time driver somewhere in this series. That was a really good weekend for him, considering he had been in the car the week before, but literally jumped in the day of the race. Having a full weekend under his belt at Monza really did him a load of good. So we're going to see how he does this week at Singapore again as he fills in for the injured Daniel Ricciardo. So that is what is happening this week. The Singapore Grand Prix. So let's go ahead and take a look at the odds for this weekend. Singapore, it's another tight street circuit and obviously very different than Monza. The first race at this course was held in 2008. It was the first ever night race for Formula One, and it has been the site of some controversy. Nelson Piquet Jr. crashed his Renault intentionally way back when to help teammate Fernando Alonso at that time. Doubt we're going to see that this weekend, but that's something that this track is certainly famous for. It is a pretty long track. It comes in just under 5 kilometers, and it actually has 19 turns. It's actually down from 23 in past years. It actually took out one of the small left-right juts that were in the track to make things a little bit easier, extended one of those straights, and it actually has 3 DRS zones. So a lot of very high speeds going into tight, slow 90-degree turns where passing can happen. So it is passable, as I said, due to those DRS zones, but there is very little room for error on this street course, and this one in particular. It almost never does the winner at this track start any lower than third. So really, you got to be starting inside the top 2 rows to be able to have a chance at winning this race. And only twice has it been won by someone starting outside of those top 3 spots. 2008, Fernando Alonso did it from 15th, and then 2017, it was Lewis Hamilton who did it from 5th. Sergio Perez, he's the defending winner. Teammate Verstappen had a rough one last year. He messed up in qualifying. He ran wide and then failed to get his way around to a podium finish on the spot last year. So that's the story of this race for him. It's going to be a tough one. It is a bumpy circuit, and the heat and humidity make it really, really tough on the cars as well as the drivers. This is a place where you will see mechanical issues because electronics overheat, engines overheat. Teams are going to be doing everything they can to make sure they get as much air into those cars as possible. And then drivers, they've got to be at their absolute physical peak. They've got to be hydrated. They're going to be worn out. They're going to be bounced around. And that makes it very easy for them to make mistakes. And that ends up with a mistake on a street course with a car in the wall. So this is one of the toughest races all year. And it's very easy for drivers and teams to make mistakes in these conditions. And obviously, Verstappen, with his disappointing race here last year, knows it all too well after last year. So what are the storylines? What are we watching this weekend? So Verstappen won 10 in a row. So can he overcome the trouble he faced last year at this track? His streak has to end at some point, but 11 straight wins is certainly going to be on his mind. I find it very difficult to believe that the same issues that caught him last year are going to catch him out this year again, but we'll see how the race plays out. It might be difficult in qualifying. I'm not entirely sure after Monza if Verstappen and Perez are going to be able to lock out front rows as easily as they have up until this point in the season. So a person getting a better start than Verstappen may make it really difficult on him. And then secondly, how about McLaren? Can McLaren return to best of the rest? I think this is a track that's going to suit their car better than Monza, certainly. The point and squirt kind of nature of it, I think, plays a little bit into their hands. And plus, they're bringing the biggest upgrades that they've had, I think, since Austria, if I'm not mistaken. So those Austrias could be a boon or a bust. Lando Norris, as a matter of fact, is the only driver of the 2 McLarens teammates that have those upgrades. And the upgrades are specifically designed to help the car in low-speed corners, which is a place Singapore has a lot of. So these upgrades, they have a lot of faith going into them, and I think Lando Norris is certainly going to hope that he benefits from those. Then third, what about Ferrari? Are they going to pack it in after this weekend, or does that buzz from their good performance last time out at Monza, does that carry them through this weekend? They've largely underperformed in races this season. They've been okay at qualifying. That's been the case for the past 2 years, actually, for Ferrari. They've got that 1-lap pace, but they just aren't able to get that car to work all the way through a fuel run and through an entire race distance, or excuse me, a tire run and through an entire race distance. So I'm actually just waiting for them to throw in the towel, give up, and kind of focus on their 2024 Challenger instead. But we'll see if some of that good luck and good performance that got them through Monza is able to get them through this weekend as well. So looking at those odds, boy, Max Verstappen definitely still the favorite, though I think if anybody is looking for somebody on the anti-Verstappen bandwagon, this might be the weekend to do it. As I said, 2022, this was not a good race for him. That could very well carry over into 2023. He's going to have something mentally that he's going to have to get over this weekend. We all know that he and Sergio Perez have the car to be able to do it, but I think this is the week where you might want to look at somebody like a Lando Norris to be able to be that spoiler for the top spot on the podium and maybe end Red Bull's streak of sweeping all the victories in 2023. So my pick outside of the favorite Verstappen this week is actually going to be Lando Norris. I think if he gets a good qualifying, perhaps gets on the front row alongside Verstappen, maybe even takes pole, I think he's got a really good shot at leading a lot of laps and perhaps keeping Verstappen and Perez behind him. On the winning margin front, you're probably going to want to go with the over 10 seconds margin here. So this is a track that does get a lot of cautions. As I said, it's very bumpy, very hot. You've got mechanical failures, and you can easily make a mistake and put a car in the wall. If a safety car does not come out, I think the winner is probably going to end up having quite a big lead with those 3 DRS sections, and the gap that we've just seen through the field throughout this season, assuming Verstappen is going to be the one in the lead, it's probably going to be over the 10-second mark. So as I mentioned, last one I'm going to hit on there is that safety car. It's almost guaranteed that we're going to see a safety car this weekend. It's a street course, no runoff room, very tight 90-degree turns, and a very tough condition and weather forecast actually for the drivers to look through. Speaking of weather, forecast actually does have rain for the weekend, but since this race is run at night, it's unlikely that there's going to be actual rain falling during qualifying and the race. Probably just beforehand might wash off the track before they get going. So the later runs in qualifying are certainly going to be the faster ones. And as this race wears on, fuel wears down, and that rubber builds up on this track, those fastest laps are going to be coming from those guys at the end of this race. So that is your preview for the Singapore Grand Prix. In review, remember, Max Verstappen going for 11 straight wins. Obviously, he's the top choice. But if you're looking for a spoiler, you're going to want to go with McLaren and Lando Norris. So again, I am CJ Radune here of Rotowire.com on the Prime Sports Network. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss any of the motorsports videos all season long. That includes NASCAR, IndyCar, and of course, Formula One. You can access my columns by clicking the link in the description of the video. And if you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to let me know what is on your mind. And until next time, keep it out of the fence.